so we're going to talk about a few other Sesame Street segments.
Okay.
You addressed another sensitive topic when you wrote the Blue Monster sketch. Tell us about that one.
Could you refresh my memory?
Yeah, so Blue Monster Britta won't play ball with Elmo because he's red.
I have no memory of that one.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding me. Can you get me a copy?
We will try, yeah. It basically addressed kind of race relations.
I wish I remembered that. I actually wrote that.
That was the 1990-91 season 22.
No memory.
Okay.
I had a lot of blackouts back then.
Another segment, this one actually never aired, but the show tackled divorce in 1992 with the segment When Snuffy's Parents Got Divorced.
I vaguely remember that one. Yeah, that I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I remember that there was a lot of discussion before writing it. Because one of the things we used to do before every season of writing, research would get together with production and you make some decisions about anything we wanted to add to the curriculum. So that's one of the reasons we added that Gordon and Susan adopted the child, is because we thought, well, one, there are a lot of kids who are adopted, and there are a lot of kids who will encounter kids who are adopted. So we thought we would talk about that, what kids at this age need to know about it. And so the same thing was true with divorce. And I'm trying to remember why we didn't air it.
So what I had read was that it didn't test well because it made kids whose parents weren't getting divorced or were together, it put kind of fear into them.
That sounds like it's so. And I don't know that this is true, what I'm about to say, whether it's an accurate memory, but it's one of the things we talked about before doing it. Because one of the things we're always talking about is, how do you phrase something to get somebody, to get a child either to understand something that is a negative, but not in a negative way, you know what I mean? So, for example, if you want to tell kids, you don't ever want to say, don't cross in the middle of the street. And because then they'll experiment. So what you have to say is, cross at the corner. You present the positive. So the minute that it has a bearing on what we did with Mr. Hooper dying. Don't go to the, don't say he's going to the hospital. So the mere presentation that there is a possibility that parents will break up, you're on television. It's just not a topic that should be opened in this way. We felt safer with Mr. Hooper dying because it was so contained. The information we were giving was contained. He wasn't a parent. All of that. It was just, in a sense, for the kids at home, it was a little abstract. But you know what I mean? In this case, when you say parent, mother, father, getting divorced, I have a mother and father. So that sounds absolutely right. Yeah.
So what is that like for you as a writer when a segment doesn't test well like that?
Well, this kind of testing I don't mind, because this isn't about the creative approach. It isn't about the writing. It's about how the content that we were trying to deliver went over. So I didn't mind that. The kind of testing I don't like is the kind of testing that tests appeal or that kind of thing, because first of all, with children, especially young children, so much rests on the design of the test, on the ability of the children to respond to questions that are asked or to what they're being asked to do by way of evaluating something. I've never seen a study that was done of appeal that didn't have a flaw in it where I would say, you know, this is interesting, but I'm not going to bet the ranch on this. But I think far too much is bet on these kinds of things nowadays, especially with really young kids. I think it's also true in general with entertainment polling and stuff like that. Seinfeld is a prime example. There's lots of shows that have violated the focus group.
Did you have any favorite segments or sketches or songs that you wrote during your time at Sesame Street?
You know, there's one in my head, just because I've been thinking about it recently. One of the things about Elmo is that everything's perfect in his world. He's always happy, he never gets angry, never troubled by anything, and all that. So I was determined to come up with something where Elmo had something. And I decided that Elmo was afraid of clowns. And there are people who are afraid of clowns, by the way. Definitely, some people are really, really afraid of clowns. So I wrote this plot line that took place over an entire show in which Telly is perfect, is dressed up as a clown for some costume party. I don't remember exactly what it was. And Elmo comes in and he goes, "Clowns! Ah!" He goes running away. Somebody goes, "What's the matter?" "Elmo is afraid of clowns. Elmo doesn't like clowns." But it's me. Ah, clowns. He doesn't even recognize Telly. So I don't remember exactly how this unfolded, but one of the segments was, they say, "Okay, Elmo, here's Telly." And no, he's got nothing on, right? And he says, "You're not afraid of Telly, are you?" "No, Elmo not afraid of Telly." He said, "Okay, now." And they put a clown nose on him. "Oh, ha, Telly has a funny nose." So we're teaching body parts, you know. "Oh, Telly has funny hair." Eventually it got to the point where Telly had too much on, so he said, "Clowns!" And he's gone through all the segments. You know, he's gone through, this building of this clown and he's still afraid of them when he finally sees them. I don't exactly remember how we resolved it, but when I'll probably, after we stop the camera, think of other ones, but I really liked that one because it bent Elmo in a way that he hadn't been bent, and I don't think I haven't seen it, maybe he has, bent in a way where he's got this flaw, sort of made him more human in a way. It gives you more to work with, where he's not the one that's always in charge and always in control, and, that kind of thing. So I really liked that one. The Hooper segment, obviously, the Hooper show. I also liked, we went through a whole series of things with Snuffy. At first, he started off being real to Big Bird and real, although some people weren't so sure whether it was just, us on television showing Big Bird's imagination, and the grown-ups not believing Big Bird. And we got some input from people who were working with kids who were abused. And they said, people don't believe them. The adults in their lives don't believe them. So this is reinforcing that notion that adults won't believe you if you tell them something that's fantastic. And what they are reporting, generally speaking, is way out of the ordinary. So we had some talk about that. And so what we did was, I believe it was that I said this. I said, well, what if at first some of the grown-ups believe it? So we can preserve the some of this, but at least when Big Bird now has somebody on his side who believes him, even though they haven't seen Snuffy, even though when they arrive and Snuffy's not there, they could say, well, maybe next time we'll see him, even though the other ones are going to the other grown-ups. Come on, it's his imagination. So there's also some truth in that. There's something that happens where you at least have not all the grown-ups on the same page. There's difference of opinion, which was nice. And then eventually we said, okay, let's just dispense with this and move on. And we're going to move on for the reason that I mentioned before, that it's better that people believe him and that we dispense with this whole fiction altogether. And it's also good creatively because now we can have Snuffy interacting with the people, and who knows where that's going to go creatively. So I wrote the show in which he is finally seen. And great satisfaction. I don't remember the exact dialogue, but Big Bird says, well, now what do you have to say for yourselves? Something like that, where he gets to give him after all this time.
So you wrote for Sesame Street for a total of 20 years.
Is that all?
It's a good run.
I've been telling people 25 to 30.
We can go with that, sure.
Jeez.
How did you keep the writing fresh that whole time?
Well, again, I didn't keep the writing fresh. Everybody did. Mm-hmm. And part of it had to do with adding new curriculum items, where, so now you're exploring how to teach different things, and you have to do that. The other was in allowing the characters to grow a little bit. That's that, and then having different interactions, different characters coming in to interact, because you put a character that likes this together with a character that likes this. For the first time, something's going to happen. It's just, it's this process. Different writers come in with a different point of view. A writer has an idea that just all of a sudden opens up something that you didn't see before, another place to go with everybody. Tony Geist was great at that. Judy was great at that. Judy Foyberg. All the writers, they would come up with something. John Weidman would do something. I just thought of a story that you would never know.
Tell us.
It was interesting because I just saw the Big Bird, I Am Big Bird. Have you seen the I Am Big Bird documentary? Go find it. Go see it. It's wonderful, wonderful. People named Copper Pot is a production company. And one of the stories that they tell is that we got a call from NASA saying, you might want to have Big Bird go up in the shuttle. And so from Big Bird's point of view, which was in the documentary, he had to think about this. He said, oh my goodness, he talked to his wife. And, oh my God, the training, and what if something went wrong, and all of this. And he finally said yes. But then they realized at NASA that he's too big. They can't do that. So I was sitting with Dulcie, and I said, well, what if Radar, his teddy bear, he had a teddy bear named Radar, tribute to MASH. What if we sent Radar up? And I came up with this idea that the captain has trouble sleeping when he's in space, so they want to send so NASA wants to send Radar to help him go fall asleep when he's circling the Earth, and then we would do the launch and the whole thing, and he would be up in space, and then we'd show the Radar floating towards the captain, and the captain would embrace Radar and then fall asleep, and he's a big hero, right? They said no. Eventually, it went all the way up to the top of NASA, and they decided to put a teacher on that flight. That was the Challenger flight that exploded. Now, can you imagine if we had done that, and Big Bird would have been down there, and the flight would have taken off, it would have been horrible. As horrible as it is, I'm sorry that woman, I mean, it's just a horrible thing. But can you imagine?
So switching gears a little bit there, you actually consulted on several international productions of Sesame Street. Talk about that process.
I really enjoyed that. I think my first experience was in Israel. The first time I went, now Israel's got this thriving television industry, and they have writers and all this. At this time, they had no experience, no writers that wrote this kind of stuff. They had poets. They had, these kind of people, So I go to Israel, and my first meeting with them, I'm sitting in the front, and they're all calling me professor, And one of them was a young poet, a rebellious poet, who was an anti-war. He was in the army, but he was anti-war, and he was a nephew of Moshe Dayan, Jonathan Geffen. And so all these guys are sitting there, there's older guys, younger guys, women, and and I'm sitting here singing, all these people have been in the army, the women have been in the army. So they're talking about what they want to teach. And they say they want to teach the word sheket. And sheket means quiet. I said, why? And now they get their backs up a little bit. Because we want to teach that, because they get to teach. All right, okay. So now the conversation continues, and now an argument starts between them. And it's getting. And I yell out, "Shut it!" Laughing, everything. It broke the ice. I said, now I understand. But I really did enjoy working with them and helping, to develop their characters. And I think I worked in Portugal, Mexico, where else? A couple of other places. I always enjoyed it because, I did China. I was in Shanghai, and that was great. It's always interesting to work, at least at the time, with people who have really no experience doing dialogue, doing comedy, forget it. And now you're there, and you speak English, and like in China, everything has to be translated. And there's a totally different culture, and the culture of comedy that we have is so different. And what they think is funny and what they don't think is funny. There was somebody that I saw in the paper recently, it was a Brazilian children's comic guy who was very famous. And he was huge in Brazil. And I knew nothing about him. Here we're so sort of like, everything revolves around us and those poor people in the rest of the world that aren't us. Oh my goodness. They're probably sitting around in their living rooms right now saying, geez, I wish I lived in Hoboken. Those lucky Americans. Oh, well, I'll just go about my sad life living here wherever the heck I am. It doesn't matter. It's not America. I mean, it's crazy.
Did each country get their own kind of new cast of Muppets, or were the U.S. characters?
No, well, they each developed their own. If it was a real co-production, what they would do is they would develop their own street. So in Israel, there was Rehov Sumsum, which was their version of Sesame Street, and it had their own buildings, their own, they would design their own place. And they would design either one or two characters that would appear, puppet characters, that would appear on the street. I think in Israel it was a porcupine. It was the walk-around character. And they had a grouch. I loved this character. I wished we had done it on Sesame Street. He lived in an old car, a jalopy. And I don't think they ever followed through on this, but I thought it was a great idea. He was always trying to fix that car so he could get out of Rekhoff-Sumson. So his whole purpose in life was to leave, and he never got out. He would always, the idea was that he would, and maybe he doesn't really want to go. I mean, that was the whole point. But anyway, so I loved working with them to develop, thinking about their characters. Then they would dub all things that they chose that suited their own curriculum. They would dub Ernie and Bert, and, Cookie Monster and whatever, and they would shoot some of their own animation, some of their own live-action film. They might pick some of our animation. Usually, the number animations were easier because numbers are numbers no matter where you are, but alphabet would change, But there were some animations that would, and films. Some of Joe's films would go, Joe Raposo's films, and
Were there ever any ideas that you got from the international productions that you brought to the U.S. version?
I don't think so.
And then in 1995, you left Sesame Street for good.
I did.
Why did you decide to leave?
Well, the real reason that's for public consumption is that Chris Cerf, who I said had written songs with me, he wrote all the music and brilliant. We've been friends, colleagues for a long time, and for almost every year, many times during the year, we would go out to eat, have a few drinks, and say, we could start our own show. He'd say, yeah, we should. And then we'd wake up in the morning and forget the whole thing. Well, we reached a point, I think I reached a point, where truthfully, I didn't like the way the workshop was going. I felt that we were being pushed too much by merchandise and marketing, that the collaboration between the creative and the content people, the research department, was no longer viable, that there was far too much power in the hands of the research department. They were overruling, and that Walt Disney thing that I said is an example of the kind of thing they were trying to do. I mean, if I didn't have the prestige that I had at the time, when that happened, that sketch would have been stopped. And what happened, actually, after I left, was I had heard that lots of things were stopped that should not have been stopped. And it moved in a direction I was not comfortable with. I didn't feel it was moving away from its roots. Not that I was opposed to change, and it needed to change, but not in the way it was being pushed. So, and we felt that there was room for a show that was a follow-on to kids that were graduates of Sesame Street. And one of the areas of development that was near and dear to Chris's heart was literacy. His father, Bennett Cerf, was head of Random House, and his mother worked with Dr. Seuss on beginner books. And so he had grown up in publishing and with his mother doing, and he knew Dr. Seuss and all of this. So he wanted to do something that was beginning reading. And so we started to brainstorm, and one of those nights, I think before we had the second martini, we came up with the idea of setting a show in a library. And Chris came up with the pun between the lions, the library lions, and between them, and that the lions would be the stars of a show, and they would be the ones that would be running the library with them and their cubs. And Between the Lions, in its basic form, was created at that point. And at the time, we decided, well, you always need a sponsoring station to get on PBS. And the premier station at the time was WGBH in Boston. And so we pitched the idea to them, and they said they would partner with us to do it. They had the expertise in doing proposals, grant proposals and all of that. We did the creative. We partnered with them, 50-50 partners, where we were in charge of the creative, they were in charge of money and all that sort of stuff. And we got a grant from Department of Education. There was an RFP, that's a request for proposals. And we didn't fit the proposal, but they liked us so much, they doubled the grant and gave us one, gave somebody else who fit the thing. And we were off and running, and so we did Between the Lions. We struggled in the ratings. There's lots of reasons for that I don't think we need to go into at this point. It has to do with promotion and all that sort of stuff, but other people might dispute. But I have to say, I don't think I want to get into that. I don't think it should be tortured, so to speak.
So just to jump back to Sesame Street for 1 second, what do you feel is the legacy of Sesame Street?
I don't think there will ever be a children's program launched that had the initial impact and the continued impact over time that Sesame Street has had, ever. There may be other great shows, but that moment in time where you had a country that was focused on helping children, you had Head Start started, you had the war on poverty, you had the country focused on doing good and trying to help those who needed help. And into that mix, you have this television show, which taps into the best talent available in television, which is just starting to mature. So everything is coming together. Television is not in its infancy. It's starting to, really become this thing, the production techniques are maturing. Everything is, so all of this comes together at the same time. There will never be another Jim Henson. All of these things came together. And so maybe in another universe, but I don't think on this planet.
So you did Sesame Street, then you did Between the Lions. And what are some of your current projects now?
Well, it seems like everything has come together for me to move down in age and to focus on maybe the other side of why kids are arriving in school unprepared. My wife was a teacher for many years. She started in teaching the 6th grade, and she began to notice that there were some kids coming into 6th grade a little bit more prepared than others, some pretty far behind. So she said, well, what's going on in 5th grade? So she moves down to 5th grade, same thing is going on. Now she moves to 4th, 3rd. Finally, she gets to kindergarten. She realizes there are some kids, and all things being equal, arriving unprepared socially, emotionally, and intellectually. They can't manage the social interactions. Their ability to move to this next level of numbers and letters and, all of this stuff that you begin to do in kindergarten, they weren't ready for. So she started to do some research, and what she discovered, and this is probably about 3, 4, 5 years ago, let's say, she's tapping into some new research that started to really bubble up. It had been going on for a while, but now it's starting to go. Neuroscience, developmental neuroscience, which is saying that the brain, by age 3, 85% of it, that's responsible for all social, emotional, and cognitive development going forward, is built by age 3. All right, so that's the structure. And without that structure, there's an inhibiting factor on future learning, because you don't have that foundation, that structure that's prepared to do the next most big phase. Now, oh, hello? I'm sorry. Can't answer that phone. It's probably somebody from somewhere I don't care about. Pick up the phone, please. Yes.
I think she's outside.
No.
It's okay.
The answering machine. The answering machine.
Okay. All right. Continue.
So, so 85% of the brain, there it is. And where are kids? Between 0 to 3, they're at home. So now we're back to that thing that Sesame Street was trying to tackle. But there we were remedial. That's remedial, what Sesame Street was doing. And so Ellen, based on things she heard from parents who were looking for information, who didn't have the time to search the internet, didn't have the time to look for the reading material or anything like that. Some did have the time to watch The Nanny, the super nanny who went into people's homes and did that discipline thing. She said video, but it's got to be short videos that are entertaining, that deliver little bits of information on what to do as a parent with your kid, that will help maximize brain development. Who do I know that could do short, funny videos that parents would like? Norman, wake up! So I got involved, tried to come up with a concept where we could do short videos that would be delivered to smartphones, tablets, online, all digital, that would be videos that would deliver little pieces of information about little things in the daily life, just your normal day. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to learn anything special. There's nothing. It's just how to respond to children in the daily moments from 0 to 3 that have an enormous impact on brain development. And it has to do with responsiveness, how you respond, looking in the eye, all these, there's little things you can do. And so after much thinking, one day on a drive from Massachusetts, on the Massachusetts Turnpike, the Baby and Toddler Parenthood News Network was born. Yeah, it's a conception born in a car. Ellen was driving, fortunately. And what it is, it's babies and toddler puppets who are reporters. We have more baby and toddler puppet reporters, correspondents, and puppets than any other news organization in the business. And we report on real stories, real things that are going on in the real lives of real parents. So we'll have real video, real parents doing things or learning about things with their babies and toddlers, reported as if, and they are, major news developments. Cry Witness News. I love that one. Anderson Pooper reports, baby chews books. Why is this baby chewing books? Is it addictive? Why is this mother letting him chew books? And what does it have to do with brain development? And the truth is, chewing books, more nerve endings in the mouth than any other place in the body at a very young age. This is the way they gather information. That's why they're chewing the book. So let them chew. They're learning something. So Terry Biltuz, who hosts the show The O'Reilly Factor, with experts who claim certain things, and he says, "Oh, really?" Welcoming them into the no baloney zone. So that's what it's going to be. We have some video that we shot. We went on Indiegogo, raised a little, raised a little money. We just formed a foundation called First Years First, and we're going to try to raise more money to do some real proof of concept things, and then do hundreds of them if we can.
That's great.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the craft of writing.
Okay.
In general, what's your writing process?
Well, it involves a lot of bandages, because you tend to, when you're banging your head against a wall, there's bruises and bleeding, and sometimes you have ideas. I don't, for me, I really have to sit myself down, force myself to concentrate. Honestly, I found out within the last 5 years I have a little bit of ADD. So it's hard for me to concentrate. And if I had only known about Adderall, it would have been easier for me earlier on. Because there are some people who are able to just get into it and stay there. If you have the slightest bit of distractibility, you can't get into the characters, the situation, in a way that will enable you to just explore. So you have to find your way in to this place where the characters live in a way that's not conscious. They just are there. You're not looking at it. You're there. It's almost as if you're watching a show, and they start to talk to each other and do things, and then your brain takes over and looks at it and says, "No, that's not." Well, it's this interplay between the conscious and the subconscious, between what you've learned about writing and what's imaginary and just purely creative in your flight of fancy. You have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to go down blind alleys. You have to be willing to say, "I've hit this thing. Oh, that's good. I've been stopped here. That's going to afford me something I didn't expect." It's all of that sort of stuff. It's very childlike in a way. It's the kind of thing that we want to encourage parents, especially of kids 0 to 3. They learn by making mistakes. Their whole learning process is trial and error. If they're not allowed to make mistakes, if you show them how to do something, they learn nothing. Something that somebody once told me, I've said this a lot to lots of people, if you put a rat in a maze and the rat gets through the maze the first time, it learned nothing about the maze. But if it has to go, it'll learn an awful lot about that maze. It's going to learn this wall is this color, and this one is this, and it goes this way. So getting lost is a good thing. Turn off Google Maps every once in a while.
So do you use a computer when you write then?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. One of the things, it's been very helpful. I can't imagine, because when you make a mistake or you go down somewhere, you're not worried, now I have to erase everything. You can leave it there and just go on, or you can cut it and paste it. It's been very helpful, I think.
How has children's television changed since you got started in the industry?
I left. It's a big change. Mm-hmm. My influence. Actually, there's so much more of it. So much more. There's many, many more programs that are making an effort to help children learn something, to be enriching in some way. I think there's a lot more really funny stuff in movies and things, and I think I love that. There's nothing better than hearing children laugh. It's, Shrek and, all those kinds of, they're so funny. Wall-E is supposedly a kid's movie. Well, is it really just a kid's movie? They're about something. There's a lot of things that are out there now that I think are just wonderful. Yeah.
What is your proudest career achievement?
My proudest career achievement, that I was able to walk up to Ellen on the street and convince her to go out with me.
Ellen being your wife.
And then, yes. Who would have thought I could pull that one over on her, the fraud that I am.
Do you have any regrets?
Regrets. There probably are in there, but I can't think of any now. I know that's one of those questions you ask a politician and they go, he had no regrets. Who has no regrets? All right, I regret I just said that.
What advice would you give to an aspiring children's television writer?
Watch what you like, what touches you, and then write for that particular thing, starting out. Just write something exactly like what you just saw, but different. Use the characters, play with them, have them talk to each other. Try to do what they do, what they've done, what those writers did. Exactly the way they did it, but something a little different. But don't try to be totally different. Don't write a pilot. Don't create your own characters. Start with what exists, especially if it's going to be for television. Because that's where you'll learn how to do it. You're using the muscles that you will need to be able to create characters. You don't know how to create a character now. But you know characters that you like, you know stories that you like, you know a tone that you like, an atmosphere. So use what you like, what touches you, what makes you laugh, and try to write those characters slightly different.
And then our final question is, how would you like to be remembered? Love it. All right. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Norman.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
I waited 2 hours to pick this up.
That's great.
You okay? We're rolling?
Okay, so tell us about this photo.
Well, this is me about 300 years ago, and Mel Brooks, and we were posing on the set of When Things Were Rotten. You can see how happy Mel is to be working with me. It was, I think, if you asked him, he would say it's one of the finest things. I'm one of the finest writers he's ever worked with, and I kind of liked him too.
You were telling us off camera that you actually met Norman Lear through?
Oh yes, I met Norman Lear when we were shooting When Things Were Rotten. Young Frankenstein was just coming out, and actually Mel invited us to a rough cut screening, and I was sitting in the audience. Mel wasn't there yet. The audience was filling up, and I was sitting there, and all of a sudden you hear from the back, oh, hey, ho, and there's Mel, and everybody turns around, and Mel looks down, he says a few things to some people, and then he says, Norman Lear and Norman Stiles, you're sitting next to each other. So I look over and I could see that Norman is sitting a few seats away. And this is my memory. It may not really have happened. So Norman, forgive me. But supposedly, somebody turned to Norman Lear and said, "That's Norman Stiles over there." And Norman Lear said, "I know Norman Stiles." Is that a Hollywood story or what?
That's great. And then you have a second photo?
I do. This is on the set of When Things Were Rotten in the castle. This is Jerry Paris, a director. Norman Steinberg, the producer and writer. Me, right there. And Mel Brooks. And, you know, you would think this is a picture of him posing, you know, for the picture. But I think he was demonstrating how he wanted the king or the prince or somebody to hold themselves in the scene. You know, it wasn't that he was just posing. I gotta say, this was just great. You know, I can feel myself sitting there, and I can still see all the beautiful women who were dressed in medieval costumes who were kind of sort of over here.
Okay, hold on, we're gonna zoom right in on that. Is that what you were looking at?
We follow your eye line.
We'll skip that. Silence is the answer. Beautiful.
All right.
Okay.
Beautiful.